Welcome to the One Puff Media Podcast, brought to you by The High Index, bringing you real conversations with people shaping the future of cannabis. Join us weekly to go behind the scenes of tech and innovation powering the plant. Come roll with us.
Hey, welcome back to One Puff Media. How are you guys today? Billy, pleasure to see you.
Doing great. Excited to meet Colin.
Awesome. Yeah, our guest today is Colin Kelley with Merida Capital. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So, Colin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the cannabis industry and with Merida Capital?
Sure. I love that that conversation starter, right? Like, how'd you get into cannabis? What was your entry point to the industry? So, I actually came from the tech world prior to cannabis, and did, like, investment banking, tech. I did a bunch of startups, like AI startups, before AI got cool. And then I was living here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and they had just passed a medical law. It was a very restrictive medical law,
Sounds
right? It was
standard.
like extract only. It was 2014. They were only going to give out 2 licenses for the whole state. It was just it was really strange. It was
Seems
a
a
very,
little
very strange.
short-sighted, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot you could say about that. But so anyway, I just happened to bump into some folks that were looking to apply. And they kind of came from the healthcare space, which I think is a noble way to kind of view cannabis, right? And cannabis is medicine. And they said, "Hey, you do startups. Can you help us with, like, the business plan portion of this application?" I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting, right?" So I get to learn about a new industry and kind of write that out. I didn't really think much of it, and then it turns out they won. So 6 months later, I get this phone call, and they're like, "Yeah, we won, and now we need employees. We need to actually build this company because we have this license, and the clock's ticking to stand it up." So I came on board Leafline Labs, one of the 2 licensees. The other one in Minnesota was Vireo, so the green goods stores. So I came on board and kind of helped build out the team and build out cultivation, manufacturing, dispensing, everything. And it was an amazing kind of like crash course in the business of cannabis. And it was really at the advent of, like, professionalization going across the country in cannabis, right? We'd been so, as an industry, been so, like, underground and siloed in certain, like, even in certain areas within states, right? There was, like, an LA scene and a NorCal scene and a Colorado, like Colorado had its own as well. So that was kind of like my first touch point into it. And I ended up one of the board members at Leafline was Mitch Berukowitz, who ended up going on to found Merida Capital when he saw kind of the investment opportunity kind of across not just license holders, also the ancillary side of the business, right? And so he's, if you cast your net wider, right, you really have an opportunity to, like, help build the industry from the ground up. So I joined him and joined Merida pretty early on and took a board seat at Leafline, and you just kind of kept rolling from there. And I've been really fortunate at Merida, and then throughout my time in the industry, more of an operator. So I've been able to get in there, work with local partners that might have, like, just won a license or help some local folks win a license, and then help them, like, okay, let's hire a local team. Let's build out your operation. Let's get this thing up and going as fast as possible and as successful as possible.
It's like on a consulting really level. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then you can get in there and, like, go. I learned how to drive a forklift and take out the garbage, and I learned how to trim, and I learned how to harvest and
wow, yeah,
set up Dutchie or whatever it is and do the things.
So definitely like an operator. I mean, you were in it. You were in it. And do you think that gave you kind of a little bit of an advantage when it came to your progression with Merida Capital and kind of the knowledge that you obtained in that space in that time?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something special to be in it right? And to understand how all the different pieces fit together, right? Some folks will specialize in a certain area like cultivation or marketing or sales or whatever it is, product, or manufacturing or whatnot. But to be able to go as deep as I wanted to in each area and kind of zoom out and see how they all fit in together. And then to also talk with like the equipment manufacturers and the data companies and the software companies and kind of see how it all works. So it became very helpful. You can also see how like certain states, you're like, okay, I know how this one's going to roll out, and you can kind of see where you need to position yourselves and to have longevity in any given market.
So when you're in there, do you find certain companies that like stir up some attention, and you go back to your board and say, hey, we need to take a look at this company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Merida did, it's particularly, in those times where there was kind of that frenzy of investing in cannabis, right? Like we used to get a lot of incoming pitch decks, and we also used to go out and see and run into a lot of companies. And I think one thing that was always really helpful is no matter where you are in Merida, you certainly, we would always dive into each company. Right. So even, we weren't the ones that like, oh yeah, no, we're not even going to take the meeting. Like, no, I'll take the meeting. I want to look at the deck. I want to like see this. And it was fascinating to see where companies were either like, they were all having common pain points, in their operations or what they were hypothesizing that they would do. And or kind of seeing where there was that friction, or where companies were either skipping over that friction, or maybe they were alleviating that friction.
Makes
So it was
sense.
right. So it's a company that's like, oh, we find a services or a ancillary company, and we're like, yeah, I've talked to 100 license holders, and they all need something like this.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So you go find them.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And I guess being on the operational side with Merida, it's a little different than being on the raise side, I would say, or that actual funding side. I guess going off of what Billy asked, does it help you does it help your business lend to operators because of not only the insight you had, but because you take a deep dive into how their ops are aligned? And I guess with that, do you help these operators, these ancillary businesses align their operations to be more teed up for the level of assistance that you guys provide them?
Yeah, for sure. I think we look at all the different, license holders. We select the people that we want to fund and know that like we're going to be involved. We're going to be deeply involved in the company, and that in order for that to go well, like we all have to have the same vision. We all have to be looking at the same direction. We can't be just pointing fingers at each other and having a power struggle, like in the trenches, because we're all in the trenches here. So let's all
You want to help them
focus
succeed.
in the same direction. Yeah. So it's
Sure.
like, hey, look, like we're gonna focus what we're doing in these areas, and we'll accept any good ideas, and we'll accept any challenges to our ideas, and we're gonna hypothesis test those really quick, because it might be the new way. And that's the key, right? Like, might be the new way, and always look for the new way. And it would then, as you mentioned, Alex, it would translate out to like some of those ancillary companies where we're like, hey, have you considered, your offering is expensive. It's like capital intensive up front. Have you considered offering it in a like as a service platform where it's less expensive to operators? Or, have you considered, right, like shifting what you do or focusing in certain areas of your business? Because have those discussions with folks. And this is something that I think is key for like whether you're a license holder operator or whether you're on the ancillary side, is that like self-awareness around yourself individually, where your strengths are and whatnot, but also the organization. right? So we want leaders who are self-aware about their organization and the market and can say, you know what, like our strengths are over here. Like we're really good cultivators. And so like maybe we shouldn't go through this drawn out branding exercise because we're not marketers. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's a
Makes
whole
and I've
different
seen a
world.
lot
makes
of,
too much sense. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen that happen way too many times too, where like, people just fall in
It's
love or like want to expand in a certain area. And you're like, no, that's not going to go well for you.
yeah, they think they can do it all,
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
And
this
in the
is
market.
standard. I think
Yeah.
it's a standard for many industries in many startups. You know what you know, you're coming into it, you got this great product or this good opportunity, and you kind of don't want to give away control. And that's kind of how I always look at it. And a lot of times I think it's not necessarily fully ego driven, but I think it's one of those things that it's a big mistake that most founders make because they don't want to give away these responsibilities because they think they're going to do it the best way, that they have the vision. And so I think you see those kind of toils between founders in every industry. And I'm sure that's extrapolated when somebody's so close and so invested in this license, this new operation, and everywhere. I think it's even more prevalent in the cannabis industry because you see so many other people that are doing it in a robust way in some of these legacy states. And so everyone wants to be the next cookies. Everyone wants to be
Right.
that next, in preparation to, a
Yeah.
big sale down the road or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You have markets where there's this forced vertical integration,
Yeah.
right? And if a company that does that successfully is really looking at they're setting up three individual businesses, right?
Yeah.
Like, because a lot of times, you know, your wholesale sales and your dispensary side it's just a really different beast
yeah.
than cultivation or manufacturing like killer products, you know.
Yeah, I
And
noticed you got into one. You worked at a dispensary behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah. I mean, I always think you gotta get in there. So I've
Yeah.
been doing that for years now, where like, I get in there, I'll sit down, I'll like go trim or I'll go, package. Turns out I'm not really good at trim. Like I'm like I can do it, but I'm not fast, right? I can
it's an
package
art.
quickly.
It's an art.
It's
Now,
always.
it's interesting because it's usually
Yeah.
a task that's cast off to some hourly employees, or in some instances, it's outsourced to a group that comes
Yeah.
in to help you depending on your yield. And I think anyone in the cannabis industry should really, really go and touch and feel the plant and understand all the individual components that go into it to bring it to a
Yes.
consumer product. Because and
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the other products who are pushing, oh, this cleaning product, or oh, this disinfectant, or this, the best one is, oh, this cleaning product will remove all your resin and leave no residuals and all that. And I think that's the most comical one because whoever comes up with that product that's not isopropyl alcohol, I mean, they win, right? And they have the secret
Right.
sauce because there is nothing else. But most people coming into it and they're like, oh, well, it's no different than cleaning sap or cleaning this. And it is very different. And
It's different.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
little
I know.
different.
Yeah, I'm Billy. I think we talked about this or posted about it on LinkedIn. But we was helping out a social equity dispensary in Connecticut, and so
Yeah.
went there and I got to go. And I just like was like, yeah, I'm gonna work at the counter for a day or two here, and that was amazing. So get to talk to all the customers and the patients, and you learn a lot,
I would.
as it turns out.
I find that fascinating. I mean, all different walks of life at the dispensary. When I go in there, there's soccer moms. There's all different walks of life. Crazy.
It's amazing, yeah. You have people that roll up in their Escalade and the people that, took the bus
Yeah.
and everything in between. And then and some of them are there for very different reasons to a lot of them. Like they're like, okay, we're here for the same reasons, in a lot of ways, right? There's like a lot of people are self-medicating or they have, they're utilizing the plant in certain ways. But it's interesting to see like how it fits into their life, how it fits into their daily life. To me, that's quite interesting. And then too, like it lets you kind of get a feel for like, because they're making those purchasing decisions in real time. So it's like, okay, like what about, right, the pricing? What about the, like, how important is it, right? When you have like tight, Connecticut has like pretty tight bands in their pricing, right? Like the cost of an eighth does not stretch a lot in the regulated dispensaries. Is pretty tight.
Yep.
And people are deciding whether they're going to purchase, 2/8 or whether they're going to add a vape cartridge or like a disposable, or are they going to do distillate or live, you know.
Yeah, they probably go in there for an idea, but then they come out, they see all this new fun stuff, and like,
Yeah,
we got to try this. That's how
I
I
think it would
am.
be so easy as a bud tender to upsell products. Now everyone's got a budget, and you mentioned it,
Yeah.
everyone, different walks of life coming in and things like that. But I think it's so easy to cross sell in instances like that when, the baseline of all the products are the same. So it's an easy sell, whether you're talking price, and it's pretty easy to evaluate custom. I've never been a bud tender, but I presume it's the same as, is that kind of mentality of bartending, right? It's easy to upsell somebody who's buying alcohol because everything that you're providing is some form of alcohol. So it's easy, right? And that kind of look at that with cannabis, right? If somebody wants an eighth, well, then you can sell them another eighth, or you can give them a half-gram cart or the live rosins or gummies. And I think it's easy because most people are so curious about the new products that come to market. They're more willing to try it, right? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of your position with Merida and some of the things that you've done in the past. And it kind of all goes back to your guys' emphasis on normalizing the industry, right? Normalizing cannabis. What does that mean practically for how you evaluate businesses before you further invest or further go down that road?
Sure. Well, I think, you gave a good example too with the like bud tenders upselling, right? And cross-selling. There's this, budget is important, right? Because you're paying cash or cash-like equivalents, debit cards or whatever. But it's kind of like this occasioning thing, right? And I actually had an executive from alcohol, spirits world kind of is talking to me a little bit, and he gives some really great examples. He's like, hey, look, when it comes to alcohol and spirits, like we know what to drink when. At first, like we were like at some party getting drunk at our friend's backyard and getting sick off something terrible, right? And then eventually we got to know, like, okay, this is the beer at the ball game, and this is when you have this wine or this whiskey or this thing, and like and you have these occasions. And so and in cannabis, like there has been a focus on like just the ingredients, right? Like THC and CBD, or maybe some of the other minor cannabinoids. And then they've started to, we've seen more like effect-based marketing, right? So like,
Yeah.
what do you want to relax? Do you want
Sativa? Yeah.
sativa? And like,
Yeah.
and so they, and then maybe the terpene profiles start to come into it, or like other things like that, right? But then we're still missing that leap into occasioning. It's like, what's the gummy that you have, the low dose gummy that you take when you want to get down on the floor and play Legos with your kid, versus the pre-roll that you have when you're out by the fire and you want to, like, with your buddies and you're smoking a joint. Or what's the, like, when do you consume different forms and different products in different ways? And we're still getting there. And that's like a perfect example too of normalization, because like we're still figuring out how cannabis lives in our lives, like out here, because it has been very secret. It's been like,
Yes.
don't tell anyone, right? Like it's the reason why
There's
a lot
still
of
a lot of that it exists.
distillate vape pens like outsell, superior live products, live cartridges 5-1 in many markets, mostly because like they're very discreet. They don't smell like cannabis when you exhale the vape. So it's still out there, right? But it's that, like, how does this fit? And so, and like, what does normalization mean? So it might mean like there's like a personalized aesthetic, like people like want to show off like a product, or like it looks nice, or it's like it kind of fits with their personal vibe, so to speak, or it fits more with like how they want to consume. Like there's been a bigger bump into like pre-rolls and infused pre-rolls over the last several years. They've been slowly like chipping away, like, and part of it is like the ritual of smoking is not an at home only activity now, right? It's
which
like
I love. Which I love.
It's great. It's yeah. But like now it's leaving and it's being in more places, and so like bringing the whole kit and the tray and the grinder and everything else like to wherever is less,
Yeah, I
not
love
always
that. When
doable,
I'm in
right?
a,
You can't bring it to a concert, right? But
Well,
I
that's
love
why,
that though when you're
you
sitting
know,
there and you can smell it and like everybody's like, "Well, who's smell?" I'm like, "That's
who's
great.
got it? Who's
That's
got it?
great."
yeah, they're like,
You
can
know?
I?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you
Who
pass
I want
that?
to see
Like,
that. Yeah, I want to be friends with that person.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
so it
So we
makes
kind of
sense
look
on
at
the
that.
occasion,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
occasional aspect of it. For me, the occasion is always a cross joint, right? If I'm going to a concert, if I'm going to a place, there's a crowd, there's nothing that's a showstopper like lighting up those three ends of a cross joint. And then you have that much more to pass around to everybody, and everyone's like, "Holy shit, I'll smoke that." Even if people don't smoke a cross joint, they'll hit that because
Conversational piece too.
This,
yeah,
it's a great point. And and then we see like even on the medical side, where we see okay, there are certain states where like workers' comp reimbursement is the workers' comp insurance is starting to reimburse for medical cannabis.
Oh, that's nice.
There
Yeah,
actually there's
I didn't
and
know
it's like
that.
okay, and there's a financial case for it too when you look at it relative to the cost and impact of like you know opiates, like if someone gets hurt at work, and whatever it is. And so you start to see like I think we notice those kind of threads. You're like, okay, so what does that mean? Right? Like then, how does something enter the like, the pharma side of it, right? Like does the product have to be, how do you define the product? Like how do you get it reimbursed? Like how do you add it to the PMP? Like all
Yeah,
of those things. Um, and so then there's like data involved there. There's also like patient profiles that are involved. Like their actuaries want to see the records of you know the scrubbed like HIPAA compliant records of like 10,000 people that got their medical cards and like why they what were the qualifying conditions and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. You mentioned you had a buddy in the alcohol division in Minnesota.
Yeah.
What I mean, do they? Are they against it? Out there. I mean, yeah, it's making a dent in alcohol for sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think we have a whole generation of folks who are a little more conscious about their consumption
Sure.
in general of things, right? And so um, we're seeing a big, bumps in like functional wellness products like functional mushrooms and all these other things too, right?
Yeah.
And certainly more social cannabis use as it becomes acceptable and as an alcohol replacement. I've talked to a bunch of folks in the cannabis industry, and I think, or in cannabis and then alcohol, sorry, the alcohol industry about this lift of cannabis and cannabis beverage, particularly in
Yeah. Yeah.
certain places. They're certainly aware of it, and I think the smart ones are also they're figuring out how they participate. Because no one wants to get left behind. They have large positions. So I think it's interesting though that they're not. They could just write big checks to kind of try to squash it down,
Well, the Texas
right?
guy. Yeah, the Texas whatever guy. Right.
Right?
That
oh,
guy.
Texas
Yeah.
is disgusting right
I mean,
now.
that's wild, right?
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
And like a lot of them are like, okay, let's let's form a political
Little
action
alliance.
committee
Yeah.
and like let's figure out how to like
Commingle.
get this regulated. Yeah, how do we commingle it? How do we get
Yeah.
it regulated in a reasonable way that like we can all participate?
I think it's just an evolution of consumer products in constantly having a revenue stream as it relates to what consumers want. And I think the best companies, I think the best companies are willing to pivot, are willing to entertain this as a real market and a real opportunity for them to grow their business and continue providing different things for their customer base. I think about Luau Brewing and the release of Climbing Kites and their drinks out in Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're going to see more of that. And I think the smart players who have the opportunity are going to see it as, well, why am I going to compete? Right? When I want to get involved, I should find a way to leverage the equipment that we already have to provide what the consumers want. And for where I live in Virginia, there's a lot of breweries and there are a lot of wineries. And I think that is the markets evolve, and as people want that, I think it's not too far in the distant future when you're at a brewery and there's going to be a CBD or THC drink on tap right next to, you know, whatever their Pilsner is or whatever their IPA is for the day. And I think that's the best way to do it. Why not? Right. But I think that you're seeing things in Texas that are really just kind of scaring everyone else that gets involved because of the federal legalities of it. They can do that. They have full control within the states. So I think it's really interesting just how everyone is doing it different in the different states and doing it different with their products and the mandates of, you know, specific amounts of CBD or THC. And so it's just, as the dust settles, it's going to be interesting in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, if I was
when
a
the
brewer,
industry's really evolved.
I would think, you know, I thought about this. If I was a brewer, I'd love to, you know, bring that into my portfolio. But I mean, where do I start? You know, what licenses do I need? You know, how do I go about it? I mean, that's the confusing part. You
It
know,
can be, depending on where you are, right?
yeah, for sure.
You know, I live in Minnesota, which, you know, they have a thriving low dose and beverage kind of industry.
Like
It's
5
actually,
milligrams.
yeah, like 5 milligram edibles, and then you know, like 10 milligram beverages, and then
Yeah.
they recently have just increasing it. But it also, it allows for on-premise consumption. So you can go to a bar, you can go to like a really nice fancy restaurant actually, and they'll give you like cocktail list, wine list, THC beverage list.
Awesome.
And it's like, awesome. Every brewery, like you said, they're like, okay, there's a licensing structure for it. So they
Yeah.
get like a $500 license, and they pay, you know, an extra 10% tax in addition to the sales tax, the 7% or whatever. But they're like, you go into a tap room and they've got their like 5 different beers and their 2 or 3 different THC beverages. They, you know, that, and they're, some of them are phenomenal. And like, I went to a concert on Sunday with my wife. It was Camp. You know, I don't know if you've heard them. They're
No.
good. Good. They're good. Yeah, it's CAAMP. But it was at a brewery that kind of has like a little music venue attached to it. Probably like, you know, a couple thousand people there. You walk in, they had like a couple of food trucks. The brewery had their like beer thing, and then they had separate, like, they had 2 different like counters for THC, and it was marketed. I was like, THC beverages, like, boom, and like, and people were smoking, and you know, you could go get, you know, you get a beer, you get a THC beverage.
Yeah, I've
and
seen
like,
them on some.
watch a good show.
Yeah, I've seen some restaurant menus recently. Some canned THC stuff. Super. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that is there are so many processors and there are so many people involved in the production of distillate for beverages and the actual manufacturing of it in Texas that supply like all over the country. So it's really wild to me how it's all going to shake out. You know, it just doesn't, I don't know. And
do they all move? I mean, do they all move? I mean, how does that work? I mean, you just don't give up, do you? I mean,
well, I think you're going to see a massive black and gray market that's going to happen in Texas.
Yes.
Right.
You know, Texas will essentially become the U.S. Mexico border in this sense, because that's how I see it, because there's so much that's produced there as far as the distillate and the actual products are made there, that it would only make sense that they're not going to stop doing it. You know, when you have that
Right.
much money, I mean, most people want to follow the law, and we would never advocate that. However, you know, there are instances when, you know, there has to be a pushback because it's pretty unjust what's happening. You know, I mean, it's a federally legal thing, and so it's really difficult. If you were involved, if you were in it and you're operating, you got 10, 15, 20 employees, and all of a sudden no, you're done. And so what's going to happen in September? You're just going to fire, you know, 40,000 people and however many it is, and you're going to shut down all these operations, and you're not going to bring that money back into your state. And those people are going to find a way to do it, because everyone needs to find a way to make money, and they've been established. And so it's, I guess, when it comes to what you guys do and how you guys evaluate companies at Merida, your investments, they span tech, they go to pharma, it's in retail. So are these the kind of signals that you're looking for before kind of jumping in bed with an operator or a business? Are these the kinds of things that you guys are evaluating from an operational and compliance standpoint before? Or do you guys actually help true up these instances to be more favorable for an investment?
Maybe a little bit of both, but I think one, compliance in the cannabis industry, whether it's either cannabis or hemp, right, is sort of like it's a non-negotiable. Otherwise, you're just sort of, it's ticking time bomb of like, enforcement or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not viable. So compliance is there. Each set of each set of state regulations is always like, that's challenging. We want to evaluate those. I also go meet with a lot of legislators and even governors and talk about cannabis and what does cannabis legalization look like? What is even a medical program look like in, say, different markets, especially, and I think it's always like those conversations are pretty interesting because these are super duper Nancy Reagan dare, kind of folks. Typically, I like that guy, like that lieutenant governor in Texas, like Dan Patrick or whatever. Like he, it's like, you're gonna die if you eat these.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, yeah, you're right. It's actually scientifically impossible. Actually.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
It's
It's reefer madness propaganda. It's crazy.
Believable. Yeah. And so like being able to say, okay, well, how does this, how's it going to play out? So I think one, like, I can bring in some science and some facts and like we can talk about that. Also, I think the infrastructure piece is really important for folks to say like, hey, like it's not just like the cannabis sales or the beverage sales, right? It's like you need IT and security, you need construction, you need transport.
To it, yeah.
There's so much around it. It's like it's
always an old white guy. It's like, this is gonna kill you.
This is terrible.
Yeah.
I was
While
like,
he's
yeah,
out,
but this is gonna...
goes home and beats his cat.
Yeah, exactly. Gets drunk and kicks his cat or dog or whatever.
That's the same. That's the same type of person that's going to advocate for underage drinking as long as it's within the confines of their home or guidance. And I think it's just such an interesting position that is being taken because it's so blacklisted still.
But it's making a lot of money, man. It's making a lot of money.
Well, and I think it's the education piece too, Yes, it's the money, but it's just comfort, right? Everyone knows alcohol. It's just been the standard. So what if the 16-year-old drinks a few beers? It's a graduation party. And that kind of thing that's socially acceptable among the most conservative type of folks is part of the problem, right? Because of this is going to kill you kind of mindset. It's just not real. There's no facts behind it, but it's that propaganda that's been pushed for so long. And I would say from my personal experience, I don't know if this to be true, but most of the people who are unsure about the safety of cannabis are of an older crowd, that reefer madness age. And it's also the people who have the finger on the pulse, right? Those are the people who are kind of guiding the regulations that are taking place. And that's the saddest part about it. Because
these guys, the manufacturers, man, they go through, everything to make everything safe, even more than, alcohol. They, reading these stories about these hemp farmers packaging,
Well, Billy, when we first got started, we were looking for our first raise when we got started with the high index, and we were talking to a few people as we were building our platform, and we'd approached some folks outside the cannabis industry, and we were looking for capital at the time. And what was interesting is some of the folks that got back to us, not that they didn't want to invest necessarily in the cannabis industry, but their reservations were about how regulated it is and how much control different government entities, multiple entities have over your business, have over what you're going to do. They're trying, and at the time, these people we're talking to, they wanted to get further away from that regulatory body, which is why they started investing in crypto opportunities and things like that, because you have one that they kind of seem similar in the sense of how they're misunderstood. And you have crypto, you have cannabis, there's these kind of one-off, and the main bodies don't quite understand it. But at the end of the day, they're so far different because one is deregulating everything. It's this new approach. The other is you're getting slapped with every type of regulatory component and compliance, and it's bananas. And I think it just goes to say about our mindset. Everyone in the industry, everyone who has a passion for it and sees this as the infant industry that it is right now, our role is so critical to help educate and to help move the industry forward and remove this kind of black label that we still have, but also further to help loosen some of these regulatory issues that we're dealing with. I mean,
Right. I think there really needs to be this movement where there are, the cannabis, the licensed operators in each state, kind of like more common sense regulations, right? So like almost a loosening of those regulations where like, instead of having someone tell you what kind of doorknob you can put on,
common sense.
like you can like make some reasonable decisions. And then also to like, include and bring in some of the hemp folks, especially like the good actors that are like, good manufacturing processes and like getting tested, doing the testing and all that stuff, and say like, yeah, like let's regulate you. Let's not over-regulate you, but like let's welcome you into a regulatory scheme, right? That like we can all be out there and we just have different, maybe like different sales channels or different whatever. But right now there's a lot of, division, I think, between cannabis and hemp or whatever, however you want to
You
call
hope that's
it.
happening. Yeah, you hope they want to bring people and ask questions, the good players. I mean, that'd be
you're not
ideal,
seeing it enough.
No,
no, certainly not.
Well, I mean, it's been the cannabis itself and in the cannabis community, it's been an industry, like a real, actual money-making, viable industry for, let's say, the last conservative 30 years. Let's say 1990. Let's say 35 years. When you look back to the early 90s and you look just at how the culture of cannabis and how much cannabis was being grown and moved throughout the U.S., there was no regulatory body. Right? I mean, cannabis was free flowing around the world. There is no regulatory body. Everyone's making money. Somehow these people, these uneducated people slinging drugs, found a way to make it viable, not only for the person selling it at the bottom, but also for the person growing it at the top and the distribution aspect of it at the top, and made it as an actual industry, which is why it was so easy. And I say easy loosely, but easy to shift into a legal structure. But too far often you're seeing these states and these individual bodies that come to be are just not listening and seeing what has worked in the past. And I think it's a lot of the issues we're having with price compression, a lot of issues we're having with the nuances, the licensing process and the regulations that are being, implemented that are just bananas, non-combust state, things like that. They just don't make any sense. They don't help anybody. You're just further restricting it just to restrict it, because of some one-off misunderstanding that some older person had sitting in a room that thought this is a good idea. It's just,
we met a lot of people already, talking to people that had businesses before it was legal. I mean, kick-ass businesses. I mean, they were moving, they had logistics going on, distribution. They had everything going on. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. They weren't, the picture that's painted, I think, of those, folks is, it's characters of a person.
So a few might have spent a few years in prison that we talked. Few might have finished few years in prison that we talked to, but they had a big operation going on. Pretty cool.
I guess now it's that kind of shift, right? Because it made sense before. You didn't have any other way to do it. And you were providing, and those people, they truly are the legacy, right?
Yeah.
Because without them taking the risks, we wouldn't even have the clout we needed to make it into a viable industry. So it's necessary. And that's why the past is so critical, but also learning from it. And it's just so bizarre, some of the perspectives that still exist that really are driving some of the things that are moving us backwards.
Yeah. There's a lot of race and socioeconomic, issues there at play too, right? You mentioned like these old rich white dudes, making rules. And then just I think historically the demonizing of the plant, but you're doing it really marrying it with like, certain race or certain populations, or using it to drive drive people into industrial prison complex, or, whatever it happens to be, right? And then as normalization happens, like some of these folks that are still in power are kind of like spinning a little bit. They're like, oh, what do you mean I can't? You know, I can't rely on that now. I can't rely on that pathway right now to whatever it is, you know, control or to keep populations. I mean, this is keep populations pushed down, right? Or depressed. I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but like a lot of people would compare. I think a lot of people would compare cannabis to alcohol, and because there was a prohibition there. A lot of people also have compared, the green rush of cannabis, quote unquote, to the tech boom. And I think it's a little different in that, like, the tech boom made a handful of billionaires that we're dealing with right now. Like, the cannabis industry is going to make tens of thousands of millionaires.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, the great news is a lot of them are going to be people who were not already wealthy. And they're going to be people who were, they're persons of color, or they're female, or they're, it's like people that, typically have been disadvantaged just by like the system. Never mind, like,
They've had that. Yeah. That makes sense.
I often think about the, the prohibition of alcohol and the similarities. And to me, the biggest thing that the differentiating factor, not so much the product, not so much the rollout, not so much the behind the scenes to get it moving, outside of the legal system, it's social media. And for me, I think that's the biggest difference in how the industry is going to either evolve or stall. When you have people spitting this kind of rhetoric in Texas and it's making national news, and you have other folks that could potentially follow suit, and you have other governments that are like, well, this could actually be a good thing, right? If they have that similar mindset. And in the past, especially during alcoholic prohibition, there wasn't that available. Let's get 1 million people behind this mindset, and that's going to shift an entire government in a different county, a different state that otherwise would have had no idea. They would have done what was in the best interest of their constituencies without any kind of outside influence. And so you have this kind of weird shift that's really affecting everything. Now, I think it's affecting more for the good as far as the exposure of things, but it doesn't take away from the fact using this to promote some one-off propaganda that's just not true. It's just not real. And I think it's that kind of tightrope in what social media has created for us.
What do you mean? The internet's not real? What?
Source of all truth,
Golly.
Everything we read is true on there. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. Last summer, I helped out with Reefer Madness. So like the play, and like the satire play, actually, from like
that's pretty
the
awesome.
2000s.
Yeah.
Like Christian Campbell and Kristen Bell and some of those folks, and they had a Showtime movie on it too. So they brought it back. And last summer they ran the play in LA and had an amazing cast, and it was really phenomenal. And they had like an outdoor lounge area where you could hang out before and after. It was great.
Fantastic.
It was super cool. And, I've been kind of working with them because they've been trying to they want to use kind of like Reefer Madness and the brand to like kind of get out there a little bit more, because like Reefer Madness is now like a bit of a, it's a verb for, it's the name that we can use for like propaganda, right? You can make anyone believe anything if you present it in a certain way, right? And there's a formula on social media for getting people to believe things that are totally not true, right? If you show them a bunch of things in certain cuts at certain, intervals, like a lot of people will do things that are against their interest, against their own interest. They'll believe it. They'll do it. Crazy.
I think the weirdest part about the social media aspect and everything else, I have these conversations all the time, because to me, it's probably, one of the most terrifying things of our society, about our youth and about the progression of our society, is that there was a time that you believed something and you were able to understand it and agree with it because you saw a photo, right? And we had the press and we were able to print things, and we know it was true because it was printed, because somebody took a picture. And then that changed a little bit when you got to TV, and then the TV came out, and the realities of what you knew to be true were different because you could see it. And now you kind of believed a picture, but you can understand the context behind it better if it were presented on a TV. So that kind of shifted. Media shifted. Your ability to control people and control an agenda shifted. And then you had the internet come along, and that was great. And then people started questioning, are these files real? Did this person write this? Is it valid? Did they validate this article? Where are the sources? And you had a little bit more control to better understand what you read. Is it true? Is it not? And there was obviously all the propaganda and the tabloids and stuff. And so you had that progression into, an internet society in the 90s. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and it was similar, but you started realizing that, man, there's a lot of way people are faking things. And now there's ways that people are misguiding and misrepresenting things. But you still had a general understanding when you saw a video or a picture. You could extrapolate that in your mind to be somewhat of a reality. And this is true because of this. Now that's gone, right? Now it's completely gone with the progression of AI, where it is now. Nothing you see online could be real, it could be fake, and you have no idea to know. And then you have 90% of the people who are watching this content who actually do not fact check anything. They see it, they think it's true, and you get one random post by some guy who has any bit of followers whatsoever, and maybe he was misinformed, and all of a sudden you got hysteria. Everyone's dying. There's fentanyl in weed and all of these things, and it only takes one instance. And there's no way for those people to kind of go back. And so in that instance, you're seeing kind of what we had back in the day, right? Before everything progressed with, if you saw somebody saying something in person, you know that to be true because that person said it. And now it's just, that is becoming the only reality that you can validate. Because if I saw a video of you guys sitting online saying something absolutely outlandish, I could not know if that were true or fake. But if I saw you say it in person, there's no question. And so it's an interesting evolution where you have to question everything. Is it being a reality or being, a false?
I question this podcast. Are we real? Were we AI?
Shit,
we
we're
AI
in the
guys?
Matrix. We're in the Matrix.
Look at us.
Yeah, it's all just an illusion.
You could talk about that forever. Jesus, you can talk about it all day long.
Well, social media though it's a bi-directional thing. And so like in the past we had, you're getting information incoming to the consumers. People are consuming information and are almost limited by that capacity of how much can they take in. And when you started to get imagery, like you said, like pictures and a TV and whatnot, people started to, it became hard for them to take the information and the context in, right? And then social media, all of a sudden, now you're contributing or creating context instead of understanding context.
Yeah.
Users are then contributing the context back in, and they're also doing it through the lens of how do I look? How does this make me look? Or how are other people going to perceive me because of my understanding of this or my lack of understanding of it or my position on this? People, are they can they stand up for certain things or whatever it is. So it gets really complex really fast. And then and now some of the AI that is just insane now.
It's
right.
The AI, man, it was the AI models is the big thing. Like AI OnlyFans. That's crazy.
It's going to change everything. It's going to change everything. I sent you that video just last week, Billy, that was created as a warning to some older folks so that they don't keep getting scammed, because now you have people.
Yeah, dude.
I could literally send a video of myself created by AI to my grandparents, right? And just, hey, you got to send me $10,000. I'm stuck here in the middle of the desert. Please help me. I need you to wire me money right now. And it's just a crazy level of evolution when you think back to 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when people were still trying to scam people through a letter and a PayPal. Here, send me this money. And they open up the letter. Sure, I'll write you this check. And now it's just, I'm just going to wire you $10,000 because my grandkid's stuck somewhere. So that video is really compelling, just as the tip of the iceberg of how people are going to leverage this kind of technology for their own gain at everyone else's expense.
Yeah, I was going to try that on my in-laws. I told my wife,
strategy.
Yeah, right. So I guess with all this being said about, the future of what we're looking at with AI, what kind of what's your take on the capital and the things that are changing throughout the next couple of years as far as the regulatory landscape? Like, how does that affect, your guys' position to help other businesses? Are you guys pushing forward more or kind of peeling back, and how aggressive you are with getting out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always taken. I think it's very important in the cannabis industry to take the long game when it comes to responding, not reacting, but responding to regulatory changes, right? So, like, if I see a pitch from somebody and their part of their business plan hinges on like federal legalization or Schedule 3 or the safe banking or some other, tax, 280 tax strategy, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
Good
you
luck.
might need to rethink. You should
Right,
rethink
right.
this because, like, you need to be. It's the same thing with like a license holder that's maybe they want to be a cultivator and they have it. It's similar to someone who has not considered that like price compression will occur, right? And their entire business model is built on like, I need 2 years
$300
of,
ounces, yeah.
you know, $2,000, $3,000 pounds, and I'm like, yeah, but you could get to $600 pounds like real fast, and then where are you, right? Like,
Yeah.
plus, like, plus people have memory too. Like, it's real hard to go, like, hey, you price gouged me before. I'm not buying from you later on,
Sure.
right? Yeah, so I think like I love to take the long approach on it. I think it's important to be involved and like, if you have a voice, like use it, right, for regulatory, you know, things and also, telling like stupid people in Texas to stop being stupid, right? But
Come
then
on
again,
now.
you know, come on. Oh my gosh. Yeah, but it's and that's like I think a lot of investors want to look at it from longer term in the sense that like federal legalization is also like even if they were to legalize it, like do things change overnight or do they not, like
Nobody knows.
what changed? I mean, who knows, right? So
Yeah.
like you can't bank on it,
Right,
Yeah.
right.
right? You can't bank on that. And so you can be ready to respond to it in like what you think is the best possible way for your business and to respond quickly and efficiently. I think that's great to have a plan for your business and critical, but it's also like, who knows how the heck it's going to look? And like, will you have interstate commerce right away? Or will certain states try to protect their own industries by, you're going to have tariffs, stuff, or do you have to license it? Oh, you just got to get this license fee and then you pay whatever import. There's another great parallel to like the alcohol industry and like how they set up their distribution, in different states, right, and control it.
What is
So
what is one of the biggest misconceptions that operators have when it comes to raising capital and getting their business going? Do you think it's that component where they're just misguided on the realistic aspect of what they're getting into and how they're looking at their ops?
I think a lot of folks that are newer to cannabis that maybe don't have the experience in the legacy market or just have not been operating in cannabis. Yeah, I think they underestimate what's involved. I think a legacy market operator could say, okay, like this is what it took to run my business previously, and now I'm going to add on,
Yeah.
the
All the stuff.
regulatory piece, and then they can say like, okay, I can see what that looks like, right? But if someone's coming in brand new, like there are people that are getting licenses here in Minnesota for dispensaries that are like, oh, I'm going to open a dispensary for $100,000.
No.
It's the most unrealistic thing I've ever heard.
Right, right.
Your cameras and security and access controls are going to be like,
60 grand.
whatever, half of that. Yeah, 60 of that.
We just talked to we just talked to that company.
Yeah, Sapphire
What
Risk.
next?
We were just talking about their misunderstanding of the implementation of security. And they're like, oh, I budgeted, 50 grand here. And it's like, guys, what are we talking about? 5 cameras? Like, come on.
Great example. That's
2,500 square
Yeah.
feet. Yeah. 60 grand.
Yeah, right. So I think a lot of people miss that. I think a lot of people love their own brand. right? A little too much.
Yeah,
Right.
true.
So they're like, oh, I'm going to have this. I hear this all the time. I'm going to have this national brand and everyone's going to love it. And like, I'm
It's
like,
great
well,
in theory. It's great in theory,
yeah, but building a brand is like really, really hard.
Oh yeah.
And it takes a lot of
especially in this
time
industry.
and a lot of dollars, and especially in this industry because we're like restricted in where you can market. And most brands interact with consumers outside of the retail environment. And we can't market outside of the retail environment very easily. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
huge.
it gets really hard. It's really, really restrictive. And that's another great lesson from the legacy market is that like hyper local tends to win, So like,
Yeah. Well, as long as the government isn't throwing out licenses
specialization.
like Tic Tacs,
Yeah, that is a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, look at Michigan. It's harder to stay local and just dominate when hey, I can get a license for $1,000, and then you have those delusions of grandeur. Hey, I'm going to just open up this dispensary for $50 and no big deal. So,
Yeah.
I think like when it comes to raising capital and starting a business as well, like a good idea or a good business is not enough. Like we passed on a lot of really great companies that I loved, and like I still like might even purchase from them. Like I love them, or I talk to their founders every month and like, hey, how are things going? And like, oh yeah, like, oh, connect you over here or whatever. But like some of it for like a big investor might be like, it might be like the team and the strategy and whatever, but oftentimes it's not. It might be like just the price.
yeah, so it's
Right?
not necessarily about the risk of it. It could just be a legitimate misalignment of the ops or the team or something that doesn't jive.
Yeah. Or it might just be like, hey, you valued yourself at, a $20 million company. And I think, we both agree that you can get to, a $40 million company. And, if I get 10% of that growth, right, I'm going to walk away with. So if I buy in for, whatever, 10% of your company at $2 million, and then I walk away with, 4 million a few years later, like I kind of doubled my money. And like a lot of like larger institutional investors have much higher multiples. Their benchmark for investment is a much higher multiple.
Yeah.
Especially like, institutional investors that can't, like a private equity fund would normally like borrow all the money that they're investing, or leverage a lot of it. And in cannabis, it's typically not an option for a lot of, they're raising cash dollars from folks and then investing it out. And so people are expecting, that like 3 to 5x multiple.
Right. Yeah.
Which would be nice for everybody.
It'd be great.
It'd be great for everybody.
Yeah.
So what I guess as we wind down here, what's the top advice that you would give to founders entering the pitch mode, and as continuing this component of the conversation?
Yeah. Well, I think right now I think there are more different types of options available. Right, there are debt options available now. There's equity. There's not a lot of dollars flowing into the industry. Right, and everyone's been talking about that for the last few years. So that's that is a thing, right? But in terms of advice, I would get really self-aware about your organization, your strengths, the total addressable market that you can like be prepared to be drilled on the total addressable market and like have like almost a mathematical formula to support it. And it can't be just like, I'm going to get 5% market share of this.
I know I can.
Yeah. It's like, no, like how many consumers are you going to sell to at what price? And like what, whatever it is. So I think you have to be really self-aware. You have to like nail down all of that and then consider like, do you want to go equity? Do you want to go debt? Do you want to go convertible debt? And then also having, realistic valuation for yourself. And even beyond that, like look for choosing an investment partner that is going to be a partner. If you're going to give up part of your company or owe them money, if it's loan and pay them like that, you've got to like they've got to be strategic in some way. Are they gonna be making phone calls for you? Or are they gonna be helping make decisions for you? Or are they just gonna be focused on like, giving my money back?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great
I
advice.
know that was the big thing for us when we started down the road about a year and a half ago, looking at partners and investment and loans, and we went down that entire evaluation and evaluated every component. It's like, all right, great, we can get
Mhm.
money over here, but they have no idea about the industry. What value are they going to be? Are they going to be tapping their foot, waiting, to get the return, or should we align with somebody who's been in the space, who understands? And so that was the
Yeah.
direction we went, and I think that advice is
Great
pivotal.
advice. Yeah.
It's pivotal. So, with that, you gave some great advice. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about cannabis fundraising, what would it be?
It would definitely be just access to institutional dollars. So there are a lot of folks that are on the sidelines in cannabis investing because they have to be. Right. So, you see like the publicly traded folks, they're all listed in Canada and the volumes are so low that they're not accurately priced. Even some of the NASDAQ listed ancillary folks are like, you could liquidate the company and they have like more cash than their valuation on NASDAQ, right? Like it's just disjointed. Their performance and their stock price is disjointed.
Would you say that like a GrowGen is similar?
That's a great example, I think, or any of those companies like that. Yeah, where it's like, well, wait a minute, they've got like tons of sales, great earnings, lots of cash in the books, lots of assets, right? Like if you're just to
Tons of
sell the company,
assets.
right?
Yeah.
Tons of assets. And yet like the stock price doesn't reflect any of that performance. You look at like, for the MSOs, you look at like GTI that has like a lot of free cash flow and they're paying like 280 taxes. They've got lots of free cash flow, but like their stock price is terrible,
Yeah.
relative to their performance. Like if they were like allowed to freely trade on the NASDAQ. And if the big issue is like, like the retail investors aren't going to move the price of those stocks, right? So it's like, it's the Goldman and Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys and all those that are buying like massive chunks of the stock, right? And like mutual funds and whatever. So like when those folks can participate, then you start to see like the disjointedness of it. Like we start to see it start to reconnect and like they start to actually work like it should. And then those dollars also start to move into like the private side because so much of cannabis, it's a lot of private companies and it's a lot of small to mid-sized companies, which personally like I love. And it's also a great investment opportunity as well. And like you want to have like it has to be more than high net worth individuals and a few family offices. Like you've got to have other bigger dollars like moving in the industry and like backing in the industry. And that like the effect of that across the board is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. With everything going on, or I should say with the lack thereof with federal movement on the cannabis side, do you think that more incoming international changes and individual countries shifting and getting more progressive with their cannabis laws, and like Ukraine allowing some component of cannabis exports happening in the future, do you think that is going to have a positive effect on like the lending component and the raising component, even if the feds don't want to come play, but we're seeing a huge shift globally? Will that affect it as far as in the few years' time, if a whole bunch more countries come on board or start really playing in the space, is that going to change, the capital component for us in the U.S.?
I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt, right? It helps, right? When you have, not just the Canadas, but the Germanys and the Ukraines and the, all over,
Australia's, yeah.
right? Australia. Yeah. I mean, that like, it definitely helps. And, at least for the time being, the US dollar is still the, default
The
trade
standard right now, yeah.
currency. And, and a lot of, the financial markets still clear through US exchanges, whether it's like foreign exchange or whether it's, investment dollars. So I think maybe it puts pressure on the US for some things to like loosen up. But at the same time, like I don't think it does enough. Some of the opening of the international piece, like, doesn't do enough from the financing perspective. It's like Deutsche Bank is still not gonna, you know,
Dish
dish
it out.
out what we want, right? Because like
Right.
that, like the gain in Germany is way smaller than like what are their holdings, out of New York? It's like
Makes
Mexican
sense.
log.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait I'd rather see international commerce than interstate commerce. I think it'd be so cool.
Very cool. Yep.
Just a consumer standpoint, I think it would help prices. I think it would allow US based companies, manufacturers, and growers to kind of level up their pricing and their overall standards, and then have another product that allows us to kind of lower it down from a consumer standpoint. Not that the other countries, I'm sure, will produce something incredible, but I think it will just help kind of to level everything out. And I think it'll give us a huge opportunity, especially in the world of tariffs and all the issues we're dealing with here right now. I think it'll give us a massive opportunity to produce our own exports. And we have such fertile lands. We have such amazing opportunities to produce something that, yes, it could be replicated around the world, but that I think we could basically become the staple and the standard of what's to expect with it.
Absolutely. I think for both from like consumer products, and you look at that and like, a wine or whatever, right? Like how that is, and some of the California wines are some of the best, in the world. But like we have all these different regions in the U.S. and there are lots of places where it's, we could grow some really amazing consumer product. Also, like on the industrial hemp side, and like some of those products that there are in like actually the total addressable market for that is larger than like CPG cannabis.
Yeah. I mean, you're seeing it over, in Israel, they're growing so much hemp and cannabis right now over there in the Middle East. And I think it will become the new standard. I say it all the time. I don't think this industry is going to be built on $50, $100, $200 consumer products. I think it'll be built on, the industrial infrastructure that we'll be able to implement because of cannabis and hemp, and because of some of the opportunities to use that as a means to better our environment and better, some of the other industries that might be a little bit more wasteful. And I think everyone knows that cannabis is not many people do, but I think that it is pretty wasteful on the consumer side. But I think if we leverage the plant and the opportunities that the plants produce for real good for humanity, I think we'll see a different shift of the industry that'll further help, lift that black label and further education component to non-believers of the plant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I love it.
Man, this has been really awesome having you on, Colin. I feel like I have learned a tremendous amount, and it's been a great riff just kind of flowing. So I really got to say thank you for coming on. And lastly, I want to ask, if somebody wants to get involved with you guys or reach out to you and has questions about capital or trying to raise money, how do they get in touch with you or Merida Capital?
I think the best way, people could feel free to reach out to Merida or myself on LinkedIn. I think would be a good one. I can help like direct it. I love talking to folks that are either in cannabis or like entering cannabis. I think we all do better when we all do better. So yeah, please reach out. LinkedIn's a great spot for that, and we can take the conversation wherever it needs to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for bringing us some knowledge on the capital side and having a great conversation. And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. And we'll catch you next time as we spotlight more people in innovation, moving the cannabis industry forward. And until then, thank you for rolling with us.